Okay.
Maria Hinojosa, welcome. Good to have you with us. We appreciate it.
It's great to be with you, Enrique. Good to see you.
So where in New York are you?
Deep in the heart of West Harlem, New York City. A year ago, this was one of the epicenters of the epicenter. And we've pretty much been in Harlem for the majority of this time.
Wow. And your offices, are they located there, or is that your home
Yeah,
base?
right now we're in my home base because the offices are closed still. But we're on 114th Street and the offices are on 125th Street. So we're just 11 blocks away from each other. So
Now, if I understand this correctly, are you the lone Latina to own and operate a national nonprofit media company?
I'm trying to figure this out. There are a couple of places, but I would say that what we have is that right now we are the only nonprofit national newsroom, independent, that is being run by a Latina. That is a national newsroom, yes.
And so tell me about the content that you guys produce.
So basically, when I created Futuro 11 years ago, we took over the production of Latino USA. Now we are distributed by PRX. We grew the show from a half an hour to an hour. We renegotiated its distribution. So now we're really doing quite well in terms of our station carriage and our placement. I mean, we can always do better, obviously, because a lot of people don't really, they stop listening, or because we've been on the air for many years now, and people are like, oh, it's an old show. And actually, it's like completely new in many ways, sounds completely new and different in many ways. We do that on purpose. And then we created a television series for public television that they did not renew. Shame on them. That was all about diversity. Actually, it was all about demographics and diversity and white fear. I think it would have been really helpful, to have around this time.
Yeah, I guess.
And then we created a politics podcast, kind of the antithesis of Meet the Press. It's like Meet the Press only with journalists of color and with F-bombs. And so it's called In the Thick, and we built it from nothing, and we're now, last year at the end of the year we were on the best of politics podcasts lists recommended by all kinds of magazines and sites. So we're squarely in the space of doing weekly political analysis from a very POC perspective. And we've launched Futuro Studios. So Futuro Studios is in production for several podcasts. Most famously, the podcast that just dropped that's getting a lot of attention is called Suave. And it's about a 30-year relationship that I have with a guy who was sentenced to mandatory life without parole as a juvenile. And then he gets out, and there's a lot of twists and turns. And that just dropped, and we produced a Selena podcast, and we produced a podcast on Puerto Rico called La Brega. We're doing partnerships, and I'm actually very busy launching investigative work. Like, I'm going back to, not back, because I did that for Now on PBS, which is,
Right.
we might have seen each other at that time.
That's when we first met, yeah.
Right. But I'm doing it for Futuro. I'm doing it investigative work about Latinos, Latinas, and immigrants. So I do think I'm the only one who's doing that particular kind of laser focused investigative work.
So who would have imagined that an immigrant from Mexico that finds her avenue into journalism, then establishes herself running a nonprofit media company. It's not an overnight thing, but it was a long journey. And I think Matt can relate to this because he's also created a production company, particularly for people of color, because you're really, you're doing who you are, really, the work you do, which I think is just incredible that you're doing.
It's really tough, right? I mean, you're up against an industry that's controlled by white people. and you come off sort of a novelty act, but your stuff has to be so much better than everyone else's.
Yeah.
And, I related to your story about 60 Minutes because I was in the Belo Corporation, which at the time was like the 7th largest media corporation. And I was told, like, and I reached the president level of my division, but I was told, you're not going any further. I mean, because like you said, there were just too many white guys that wanted a shot in Texas at the job. So that's when I split off, started my own company and ran it for 14 years. And, I extracted my revenge on them because they sold me my division for $25,000. I mean, everything. And I had already in hand a contract for $2 million. So, because they just didn't even get the worth of having someone
That's
of
what
color running a division.
that's what's so sad is that you like, if you strip everything away, all of the arguments in terms of journalistic responsibility in this case, strip all of that, like, representation, equity, and if you just get down to the market analysis of it, it's like, do you not see data? Do you not see what the future of this country looks like? So I'm happy to hear that you were able to figure it out. And I don't want to say it like this, but I'll say it. I mean, in many ways, I am having the last laugh.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people criticized me because I wanted to work in audio. And in 2010, people were like, who's listening to the radio? Come on, nobody, radio, no. I wanted to focus on diversity, and people were like, who's even talking about that? Like, come on. We're post-diverse now, like, because Obama. And I also made it a nonprofit. And I got a lot of pushback, but ultimately I think all of those things were the things that allowed me to be where I am right now, which is really successful. And most of all, what makes me really happy is to be able to give jobs
Yes.
to not just young, because not everybody in our staff is entry level. We have mid-level, we have senior level. I mean, that, Enrique, is really like the coolest thing, because it's like, wow, I'm able to employ people like you are able to do that in your production company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just very exciting.
Yeah.
That they have a place to be. That is not
but
all.
it's
It's
so
not all
clear
white people.
that the white power structure just doesn't recognize that. I mean, and then they resent it that you're successful. They actually do resent that.
By the way, do you know about like this great collaboration? If you don't, you need to know about it. So I'm assuming you guys know who John M. Chu is.
Mm-hmm.
John M. Chu is the director of Crazy Rich Asians, the movie, which is like a phenomenal movie. And John M. Chu is the director of the upcoming movie In the Heights, which is based on the award-winning Broadway show that then has been made into a movie. And it's a strictly Latina story. And you have an Asian American director, and he does a phenomenal job. It drops in June, and I bet he'd give you an interview.
Yeah.
Well, we'll reach out, definitely. So, just to back up too, your story is connected to 60 Minutes in the creation, I guess, when you basically got turned down by them, even though they liked you, but they had too many white guys. And from that moment, you then go down this route to create your own nonprofit production company, media company. But, it wasn't an easy thing because it scared the hell out of you, right?
How did you know? Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite recent quotes that I wish I had seen earlier is from Georgia O'Keeffe, who I've always loved her art. And she said, I've been terrified out of my wits every single day of my life, but I've just never let it stop me. And I'm like, yeah, I can kind of relate. I mean, launching your own nonprofit media company in the middle of an economic downturn, having never really done anything like that before. I have said that, doing something like this is not for the faint of heart. You really have to have, the capacity to not freak out. And I learned a lot from people who had done things before. And I would always ask them, like, how do you, like, there are really rough moments, like really scary moments.
Oh,
And
yeah.
one of the best pieces of advice I got was like, just keep breathing. And I was like, are you serious? That's the piece of advice?
Yeah. People don't get how hard it is to run your own thing, right? I mean, the biggest fear is like payroll, making payroll.
I was going to say, making payroll. I'm just like, it's like, just breathe. And then it's like, you have to remember, okay, it's not life or death. Thankfully, we never got to that situation, but very close, too often, too scary about payroll. That's exactly right. And it has to do with, the business term is cash flow. I didn't understand. There's a business term. We're just having some issues with cash flow. No, cash flow. It means there's not enough money in the Oh, wow. I'm so glad that we're not in that space. I mean, as a nonprofit, it's always, difficult and challenging, but thankfully we're not. We're really growing as a company. We're growing.
I think nonprofit public media is the only thing that's going to save journalism today. It's my opinion, because for-profit media is doomed. I mean, because they just have to appeal to eyeballs. And that's why you get the polarization of why MSNBC goes to one audience, Fox goes to another, CNN, who knows where they're at half the time. But I think at least public media covers the stories that need to be told.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I am a public media geek, public media nerd. I am a public media child, elder, because I have to recognize. So public media is in my veins, deep in my veins. And I don't mean just NPR. I mean from Pacifica to NPR and along the way. PRX is our distributor now. I think the larger critique, I would say, of NPR in particular, and it's such an important part of the system, and public media in general, including television, is, very clearly a lack of representation and equity. And it's a bad business decision, but also in public media, it's part of their mission statement. Like, public media is there precisely to represent all of the voices that are not heard. So really what we should be seeing on public media is actually, in this case, news programs that are dealing with Pacific Islanders, Indigenous people, Asian folk, Latinos, Blacks. And I'm saying in that order because those are the most invisible, right? That is, in fact, what public media should be doing. It is supposed to have the commitment to represent the underrepresented voices. So I love public media, but I am also very clear about making demands on public media. And part of what I believe needs to happen is that the conversation, the narrative, the way it's talked about, it is not public media, NPR, PBS, the CPB, is not for white people to share with other. It's not for them to share with us. It's not theirs. That's going to take a long time to kind of break that. Well, we'll open it up, or we'll give you an opportunity. You don't understand. That dynamic has to come from us, placing demands on public media at every turn. And it's doing okay, but it's not doing great. Definitely not. It's not doing great.
Go ahead. Oh, there's one question I wanted to ask you, because it's really, just on my mind all the time. And that is the level of anti-Asian hate right now. Given Trump, launched his whole political nonsense vilifying Latinos, right? But what I'm interested in is, are Latinos suffering the same degree of violence and hate that Asians are right now? I mean, because that goes unreported. So I have no idea. It seems exactly like the media has covered Asians as the shiny object of the moment.
Yes. The numbers are incredibly high for acts of hate against immigrants, against Latinos and Latinas, against Asians, against Muslims. And the perpetrators of these crimes in the majority are white men. So, I covered the racist massacre of people of Mexican descent who happened to be shopping at a Walmart. You know, that was their crime, to be massacred. I think this is, we have to talk about this, right? We have to name it. All the time, whenever I've been on a platform, whether it's in the thick or on other platforms on MSNBC and such, I'm constantly saying, look, my ancestry as a Mexican immigrant is tied to Asian arrival in the United States writ large. Why? Who were the first people prohibited to step on this land by law? The first people who were prohibited from coming to this land were actually Chinese, Asian women in the Page Act in 1875. And then it becomes the Chinese Exclusion Act. Those women who were called by the history books and by the politicians prostitutes, and that's why they were being denied access to this land. They were coming to meet their husbands and partners, just like my mother was coming to meet my dad. And the exclusion is different now, right? It's different, but that is the history of this country. So my ancestry as an immigrant is tied to Chinese and Asian ancestry of exclusion in this country. And that we have to make those connections. So, okay, so we have to take advantage of the moment and talk about this. There is, it's very subtle in Latin America, in Mexico, the anti-Asian vibe. It's pejorative, you know. So they will say that they're going to call you chinito out of ternura, out of affection, but not really. You know, they'll refer to everybody who's Asian as chinito, and it's like, no, there's Japanese, there's Filipino, there's from Thailand, there, etc. So we have to take this moment to talk about anti-Asian hate writ large in this moment. So yeah, it's very scary. I think of all of the people who I know who right now, you know, even in New York, it's like New York is a city where everything is happening. I mean, San Francisco, right? Where Seattle, where everybody's kind of cool with things, and all of a sudden it's like it's not so cool.
You know, one of the things that's really difficult in this too is that the perpetrators in some of these attacks have been Black, and trying to understand what's happening there, and then
you don't have to be white to believe in white supremacy. First of all,
we see. Have you seen that? Yes.
You know, if you are Black and you are consuming media, like let's say Fox News, then and I don't know anything about, you know, these particularities, but you're going to become subject to the same kind of narrative of, you know, it's their fault that you're being fed on those channels. So Black people live in the United States of America. It's not like they don't watch Fox News or are exposed to that kind of hateful rhetoric.
Well, and you layer on top of that the fact that immigrants and Blacks, people that don't have means, right, are forced to live together and fight for resources. So the dominant culture almost sets up a Hunger Games scenario for these people. So almost just by necessity, they don't like each other.
Yeah, except that I also think, like right now, as I'm watching the trial of Derek Chauvin, I'm thinking a lot about, because I grew up in the Midwest, and it actually, in working class communities that are diverse, there are a few, not many, there is a kind of like working class solidarity that is cross-cultural and cross-racial. Not always, but I've witnessed this in the Midwest. And I actually think that in many ways, George Floyd was kind of an example of that. I mean, he worked at a Latino bar. It was a cumbia joint. People around him spoke Spanish all the time. He was friends with, probably surrounded by a lot of people who are undocumented immigrants, the people who Trump hates. His girlfriend was white. He was from Texas. He was very, so I think, there's actually much more to this complexity. And I want to further hold up moments when we are getting along, as opposed to only focusing on that division, which again, in the United States of America, white supremacy is the way it's everywhere. It kind of exists everywhere. And so if you buy into that, it doesn't surprise me that you will be a Black man who will do this. It's heartbreaking, but.
Maria, in reading your book, also, I spent a lot of time actually listening to it because I took the audio version and I was on a road trip this past week.
Cool.
But, I found myself relating to many of the things that you had encountered as a person of color. And I think Matt can too, in that in our generation, we were the first or among the first to be in newsrooms or production offices, and found ourselves just, sometimes I wonder how in the hell we ever surved, because it just,
we didn't know any better. We had no options.
Exactly.
You're right.
Have no options.
Right. But I listened to this and I thought, wow, this just sounds like my life. But this little Latina over here, she's over there fighting and scrapping. But do you think it's changed much today for the younger group that is coming in that want to be journalists?
Here's what I say. I'm like, look, you have to know why you want to be a journalist. You have to be very clear about why you want to do this. You have to love this because it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. You might get your heart broken. You'll be hearing a lot of no's. So you need to know why. That's kind of in general, because you have to develop a thick skin and kind of be ready to fight. I think what I hear from younger journalists of color, and journalists of conscience who don't necessarily have to be of color, is I hear that there is a lot of the same kind of vibe that goes on. And if you look at a lot of the institutions, like, for example, public radio stations, in many ways, structurally, they haven't changed. There's still the same power structure in terms of the newsroom. And so these things still exist. We don't experience them. Like, that's why I'm like, wow, you mean those things are still happening? Wow, people are still saying those things in newsrooms? Wow, what? Because I don't operate in those newsrooms. It's been over a decade now for me. So I worry that there is a lot of old stuff that's being replicated because people don't know any better and they don't step out of the way and let other people do it in a different way that isn't, based on essentially from a white male perspective.
I think you're right. I think you're very right. And that, again, is why I think it's important for, more journalists of color to be in those roles of leadership in order to make some changes in those types of situations. But, it's hard. It's still hard.
Well, it's really hard because the industry and the audience values brown faces on camera, but they don't realize they have no say. It's the management that makes the decisions. And that's what always bugged me about, especially TV journalism, because you see a reporter of color says, see, they're doing their job. No, they aren't. Management is window dressing.
Yeah, we know this. It's part of the battle. It's part of the battle, which is you can't just do the window dressing. I'm really sad that we didn't have an opportunity. Well, mostly because they didn't really want to take the opportunity. I wanted to have a national conversation with senior editors to talk about what was happening in terms of the coverage of the previous presidency and administration, because I think we went into this, there's both sides, and we have to treat the presidency with deference and respect. And I was like, but you're not understanding. He's not playing the same game.
Exactly.
And for journalists of color, this was a very difficult, very challenging thing to survive. How am I, as a Mexican immigrant journalist woman, how am I supposed to cover this White House? How am I supposed to be objective? So, imagine if Donald, let's say, okay, let's make a parallel. It would be as if Barack Obama, started out his campaign by saying, white men are evil. And then you want the white men who are the editors in chief of the Washington Post and the New York Times to cover Obama without any kind of sentiment when he has said, white men are evil. I'm making all of this up. Obviously, I don't want people to, but do you understand? This is what we're trying to say, is that if you are a journalist of color, one, we are part of the history of this country. Do not erase us. Hello, Frederick Douglass, my founding father. Period. And journalists of color and of conscience have been a part of this country from the beginning. And we will not be silenced because we are part of the historical record in this country. That's how I operate.
Yeah. But I'm noticing more and more young people that don't consume news, the traditional way, have such a mistrust for the media that they won't talk to them, they won't communicate with them. And I think that's a real loss.
It is. It is. I mean, I would love to get Rupert Murdoch in a room and try to understand to what end. To what end are you doing this? To what end are you keeping Fox News alive and pumping lies? To what end? Because you're just too old to think of something different to do. I mean, it's not an ultimately winning business philosophy if you understand demographics. I mean, is the rule that when you die, Fox News is going to die with you? I don't understand. And it's incredibly frustrating and frankly very scary and really upsetting, because it changes the dynamic and it makes it so almost impossible.
It actually also is what's making people of color targets in this country, as we're seeing with the attacks on Asians, but also just anything regarding immigration. And I mean, we experienced that for 4 years. In the book, one of the things you talk a lot about is just the stress, the anxiety, just, I visited psychiatrists a lot during the time I was working full time, and still take antidepressants. I think as journalists, we experience many difficult situations, but I would also say that as journalists of color, you not only with what you cover, but what you have to endure in a newsroom that can just really play with your head and make you wonder about yourself. And I'm about to moderate a mental health conversation with some journalists, and that's actually one thing I want to bring up, because I think that for journalists of color, that there is another, and for women too, as well as the gender issues that just I think going into this business, you have to consider the fact that you're going to have to deal with a lot of crap.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's why I talk about it with my students, and I make it clear it's not pretty, but it's all hard work. It's all going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging, but be super clear about what you're getting into. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's what I write about. And once I was you, I would go to my job at NPR, and then I do therapy, and I just be like, oh, I'm going to get found out at any moment. They're going to discover that I have no talent whatsoever, that I can't really write, that I have no idea what I'm doing, that I'm an imposter, that I shouldn't be here. And she'd have to talk me down. And, yeah, when you're the first, there's just so many comments that are made and you begin to internalize it. I think I've said journalists of color shouldn't, especially in public media, should not have to be warriors in order to make a career. sure, we're fighters, obviously fighters for the truth and such, but we shouldn't have to be guerreros, warriors, just to do our jobs. People are like, oh my God, thank you. My God, you're such a, you're such a fighter. And I'm like, yeah. It would have been nice just to be able to do more, and I'm fine, by the way. I'm not complaining now because, we have our own thing, and I'm doing the reporting and journalism. Well, as soon as the pandemic wraps up, and I'm able to get out of here and, to continue doing on the ground reporting. But, yeah, I there was a long time when I had bosses and I had to respond to them.
Long haul, long journey. The book, what's been the response that you've had so far? Because you get very personal with what you experience, but you also bring a lot of history, that things that I had not known of before, that I thought was and explaining, kind of backstory of certain things. But the personal side of it, you really hit on hard. And
yeah. There's been a lot of love for the book. It's been, right now it's on social media, so it's been hard because normally I would have been out there and hugging people in different cities. I'm a hugger, and that's not happening. So the feeling on social media, and in the events has been just like a lot of people are very thankful that I wrote the book. They're just like, thank you for saying these things. I did a couple of events yesterday. Where was I? I was in Fresno and I was in Houston, of course, virtually.
Right.
And a lot of gratitude for talking about these things intimately, whether it's the imposter syndrome, my insecurity, whether it's my rape, whether it's, fighting for my marriage to survive, whether it's, the problems in the newsroom, fighting for my voice. I think people really appreciated the fact that I'm able to talk this way. And this is what I was just saying earlier today. I was like, I've been doing this, for a while. You guys know this. I've been around for a while. And so I'm not ashamed to talk about anything because I actually think it helps people. And I've learned in doing so many interviews that, when you can authentically answer that question and go there and open your heart, it really helps other people to understand each other. And I'm all about our common humanity. I think it's going to save us.
So talk about what's ahead for your media organization and the types of work that you're hoping to turn out here.
There's a lot going on. I mean, we got extraordinary reaction to Suave, the podcast, which, again, I meet Suave in 1993 when he is sentenced to mandatory life without parole as a juvenile. I meet him in prison. And then almost 30 years later, we released this podcast and he does get out, but there's a lot of twists and turns, and it's hundreds of hours of phone calls between him and me over 30 years. So it's quite extraordinary. And that is opening all kinds of doors. So we've got, I'm doing some work, believe it or not, in dramatic podcast sphere. So I'm dipping my foot into something very different, really purely artistic, working with actors and writers. And I'm doing a lot of this investigative work. There is another book that's coming out soon. I can't say because it's not official, but let's just say if there was going to be a version of Once I Was You that would be for a younger audience, that might be something that I would be working on. So, there's, I kind of have to pinch myself, Enrique and Matt, both of you. I have to pinch myself to just be like, wow, this is like it. There was a lot of sweat equity. There were a lot of nights, Matt, the sweat, the worry, the payroll, the oh my God, this person is leaving and what are we going to do? And we don't, but in the end, I'm in a space as a journalist, as an executive, as an entrepreneur. I'm getting all kinds of respect. Because the work is speaking for itself. And so, Matt, like, the fact that you created Hoarders, you were like, there's something here. There's something here. And we have to trust ourselves as storytellers, as journalists, as writers, that we know what we're doing. And I'm really glad that I never gave up.
Yeah. There's nothing like success to, garner respect, right?
But it doesn't, like you kept saying it again, but it doesn't happen overnight. That's what I keep
No,
telling
no.
Yeah.
I'm actually, I think we talked about In the Heights, right? I'm in the movie
Yeah.
In the Heights.
Oh,
Like
you are.
I'm in the movie. I have a role. And you don't know this, Matt and Enrique, but actually I wanted to be an actress. Like I wanted to be an actress on the big screen, on Broadway. And so this decades later, that dream comes true. So I try to tell my students and my staff, just have the long haul dreams, please.
Actually, I did know it because you talk about it in the book, and you talk about
so much fun.
Well, you also talk about just that whole thing of meeting a challenge and then having someone kind of pop your balloon, or let the air out of your dream.
Yeah.
But yet still seeking it and going after it, which you did as a journalist. So that was, I got to ask you about what's happening in America today, though. I mean, we see what's happening on the southern border, and the concern about that, as well as the political distraction that I think is that the Republicans keep throwing up regarding that and COVID. How do you make what's happening in the country today?
I'm devastated. Many mornings I have to fight through a tremendous sense of defeat and doom and this kind of the dystopia of the future that we're living in. And then I think of people who, live through much greater challenges. Not to say these aren't great, but Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and I get inspired, but right now in particular, about what's happening on the border. First of all, these are refugees. The majority of the people who are coming are refugees. These are not people who are like, oh, I think I'll just go for a better shot at, it's not that simple. And so that needs to be primary in our minds, because I'm not going to allow it to be framed in any other way. It's not an invasion. It's not a surge. Yes, there are more people coming, but you know what? The Biden administration knew this, because it's been happening since the 1990s. It didn't just happen January 21st. These numbers of children have been on the increase since Elian Gonzalez in the late 1990s. So I refuse to kind of be part of the narrative of there is, this crisis. I mean, there is, but I don't want to encourage that, because actually the cameras will leave and it will stay the same. And that's where I'm just like, you need to understand that if you're going to do this, then you actually need to be covering it every single day, not just, 10 days out of the year when it has a sexy headline, so that you understand context. So you're reporting on context. So people begin to understand, wait a second. So some of these places are making money off of the housing of children. Oh, wait, I need to understand. So I'm not surprised, because George Floyd was murdered by law enforcement, not just one officer, not just Derek Chauvin, but the other 3 officers who stood by, and did that, caught on camera. So this country, 402 years later, 1619 to now, still does not get it. Still does not understand and respect Black lives. So we want them to respect immigrant lives? No. Immigrant lives right now are on the front burners of the dehumanization. Donald Trump started his entire campaign insulting me, Mexican immigrants in particular. I'm like, what did we do to you, bro? We've taken care of your horses and built your houses. What? And cooked your stupid food. Like, please. So it is a much bigger problem. And frankly, until we have true cross coalition work on this, so that anti-Asian hate, the movement for Black lives, anti-immigrant hate, anti-women hate, that all of these things are understood, how they are interwoven, that's when hopefully, there's going to be some more progress. But right now it's terrible. It's terrible. Keep in mind, though, I really want to keep it, there are millions of people who live in Central America. There are not millions of people at the border. There are a few thousand people who are desperate. And what I have said to Joe Biden is, how about if you're a real leader, you take the wind out of the Republicans' arguments, because you say that you're doing this because you are a Christian and you are following in the footsteps of none other than Jesus Christ. And you go down to the border and you, Joe Biden, kiss the feet of the children. And you say, I see you. I am here to help you. I mean, what are the Republicans going to do? You know what I'm saying? Like, I really, wow. You take the win. You don't allow them to characterize us as gangbangers, etc. You change the entire narrative. So it's a tall order. I'll keep asking. And I don't think it's radical, by the way. I know people are like, oh my God, that's so radical. No, what's radical is taking children from their parents and putting them in a cage. What's radical is taking a woman's uterus simply because she was not born in this country. That's happened in our country.
Yeah. Maria Hinojosa, her book is called Once I Was You, a memoir of love and hate in a torn America. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Always good to see you, and always great to talk to you. I just, admire your work and keep kicking butt.
Thank you so much.
One particular thing I want to say to the both of you before I let you go that didn't come up is that an important part of the story for Once I Was You is actually my relationship with the Vietnamese community. And so I'm in particular wanting to build bridges because that was the first televised refugee crisis that we lived through. And our colleagues in the news media, we know exactly the derogatory term that they came up with to name people who were refugees, desperate people, refugees who the Statue of Liberty says she wants to welcome. And our colleagues labeled them boat people. So no. And I'm seeking to build these bridges between myself, the Vietnamese community, Vietnamese writers, so that they read Once I Was You, and we talk about our common shared history. But thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah.
And Enrique, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, a little history here about Washington State. We were the state that invited the Vietnamese that came here as refugees. When Jerry Brown turned them away, we opened the doors under our former governor, Dan Evans, way back when. So,
oh my God, so beautiful. Thank you for saying so. Thank you for saying so.
Maria, thank you so much. You take care. Good to talk to you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Adios.